Well, joining me now to discuss the recent development in Tanzania is an international affairs analyst. He joins me from Boston, Massachusetts. He is Hamilton Odunze. Good to have you after a while. A great weekend to you. Now, let's talk about Africa. I'm glad that we're talking about something that bothers, us as Africans. Let's have your thoughts on the electoral process in Tanzania, given the exclusion of key opposition figures and allegations of vote rigging.
Right. Thank you for having me again. Yeah, as you said, after a long time. The election in Tanzania, you mentioned that Samia Suluhu won the election by 98% of the total vote cast. Already, he has generated a lot of criticisms. He has already generated a lot of criticisms. Groups who said the election in Tanzania is more like a coronation as opposed to an election. They keep wondering, how did she win the election with 98% of the total vote cast when the actual total vote cast is in the 80s?
That, worries because the figures about the death toll, some being over 100 injured. What do you make of the internet, issue? Because a lot of people, in fact, if you've got friends in Tanzania, trying to reach them is a problem to see if they're safe. And how do you assess the legitimacy of the election results, considering the reported irregularities and violent protests?
It is really difficult to assess, to say an election is legitimate when the authorities are clamping down on intensified on opposition ideas, opposition opinions. They've intensified and clamped down on it. So it's really difficult to say that an election is free and fair or is legitimate. But as it is, the hopes for reform, she started with the hopes for reform and other, but now we are looking in hindsight, that's not what she's doing. In fact, as a matter of fact, after the election, an army officer, which is rare and unheard of, especially in Africa, an army officer came out and did a video where he's calling his colleagues to topple the government. The problem we have is if this continues, we're wondering if this is going to be the trend in Africa.
Also reference this conversation to the fact that how do you explain how the internet in that country is totally shut down? And, what role do you think the electoral body played in all of this? Because the electoral body in any country when it comes to election is key.
Yes, the electoral body is key to any election in any country, as a matter of fact. And when they are compromised, the likelihood that you're going to have a free and fair election is significantly reduced. So that's what happened in Tanzania. The electoral body, they conducted the election, but as an incumbent, Suluhu, the electoral body there is compromised. And like I said before, it's hard to say that the election is free and fair when they are compromised. But they're supposed to have a good election, but they did not.
How do you think the government should respond to the violent protests and allegations of human rights abuses? It's obvious, opposition wasn't at the polls. She was the one, just like you said, it was more like a coronation. And what are the potential consequences for civilians if the situation continues to escalate?
Well, if the situation continues to escalate, we just pray that it doesn't escalate. If it continues to escalate, what we're going to see is displaced civilians and unrest. And it will continue to get dangerous. Maybe many more people will disappear. Maybe there's going to be a lot more killings, and we just hope that it doesn't escalate from here.
So how might the international community respond to the situation in Tanzania, given the allegations of electoral manipulation and human rights abuses?
Well, the way they're responding, you and I know that they're very slow to responding when it comes to Africa. The way they're responding currently is wait and see what happens. Maybe they're going to wait. If they're going to wait until it becomes really difficult to maneuver the system, and then that's when they're going to come in and say, we don't know exactly how they're going to respond for now.
And I want to take you to the fact that, a lot of people have referenced the fact that African leaders barely do give a chance to the younger population or even try to seize power once it's time for them to leave office or even have a free and fair election. How does this, communicate the body language of Africans to the global community? And I could go on and on giving you instances of presidents who have been in power in Africa for years, and ceding power seems to be a problem. What's the body language, what are we, pushing out there as a people?
Well, what we're pushing out there as Africans is that democracy is still on trial in Africa. As you said, many African presidents and people in authority, it's hard for them to cede power, maybe to the younger people or to the next party. The body language here is really critical, and if this continues, it's sad that we're seeing an Africa where democracy is on decline, and this is not just my assessment. This is what the international body has said. For example, the Freedom House in 2020, I think 2024, Tanzania was faring better in the analysis of democracy, and come 2025 is a 10% drop in Tanzania. So this is the trend across Africa, whether it is Nigeria, whether it is Zimbabwe, whether it is Tanzania. Democracy, the survival of democracy keeps being something that we all should be concerned about.
And I'm worried about this because, opposition, leaders or some of the opponents would be out to respond. Now, what might the opposition respond to the election results, and what are the potential consequences of, politics in Tanzania?
Well, the consequences is increased violence. And as you know, even before this election, Suluhu continued to clamp down on opposition, and people became very afraid to speak up. And I think this trend is going to continue even as as the unrest continues. She's going to keep clamping down on opposition, and this will make it very difficult for them to speak up. It will make it very difficult for them to to articulate their position and what they're going to do going forward. We just hope that the situation is resolved as soon as possible.
I would like to bring African Union into this. How can African Union and other regional organizations engage with the situation in Tanzania? Also, how can this situation bring unrest to to East Africa?
Yeah, there's going to be unrest in East Africa, and I don't know that the African Union. I don't know that they have the moral authority to intervene in Tanzania. If they did, they would have intervened by now. Because if you look across Africa, this is the trend, and you have to have a moral authority to intervene. And I don't think that they will do anything, as soon as we want them to do it.
Thank you so much, Hamilton Odunze, for making out time to join us from Boston, Massachusetts, to talk about, the unrest in Tanzania and, of course, Suluhu winning the presidency. That's, more details to come in as the unrest, continues. We hope not.